how I got into this mix.
This is Derek Bros with the Conscious Resistance Network. Today I bring you a new guest and someone that I've conversed with online for maybe a year, 2 years now, as I've watched his work and watched him grow. And we're both in Texas, but for some reason we haven't got to meet in person yet. But I'm excited to have this conversation and to share it with you guys. Please welcome Will Schnack. How you doing, Will?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing good, man. So it's a good day to talk about anarchism and philosophy. So it's always a good time for me. I wanted to give the audience a chance, though, as I was just telling you a moment ago, that these ideas that you discuss, a lot of the topics we're going to talk about today throughout the interview, are extremely interesting to me, and I want to, present these two ideas to people who maybe haven't heard them before. Maybe they're just stuck in the more anarcho-capitalist or American libertarian milieu, or maybe even historical anarchism, but haven't pursued these ideas. But before we get into all that, let's go ahead and hear more about who you are as a person, as a human, as an activist. I know that you're, as I said, you're in Texas, you're in East Texas now. Tell us a little bit about who you are and how you got into activism.
Okay. Yeah, I'm Will Schnack. I got into anarchism specifically through punk rock, just because I played in bands and I listened to a lot of bands, and anarchism was a prevalent ideology in punk rock. So I got into it through that. And ever since then, I'd been interested in organizing, and I was part of the IWW, and I started a local branch here with a couple friends. And that ultimately culminated into a Starbucks workers union. And then after the IWW, I decided that I kind of wanted to branch out, not away from labor, because labor is always a concern for me, but away from specifically union activity. Not that I think union activity is bad or a waste of time or anything, but I just don't think it's the end-all be-all. So I, with some former Wobblies from the branch and with some other friends, I formed a Black Cat Collective. And with the Black Cat Collective, it's kind of a largely informal mutual aid group, but we have a little collective space that's in the foyer of a house in the middle of the city, and we have a little library there, and we have classes and workshops and meetings, and we ran a project called the People's Arcane School from there, which was a DIY peer-instructed school of metaphysics and philosophy. And we also, from the Black Cat Collective, put out two copies of a literary journal called the Bombay Notebook. They were just art contributions from the local community, both visual art and written art. And so that's kind of who I am. I write books about philosophy, and I'm really interested in philosophy and getting people excited about it. So I'm really happy to be on the show.
Awesome, man. Thank you. I really appreciate that information. Before we go into the philosophy and the anarchist-related topics, can you talk a little bit more about the Arcane School? Because I've seen that online when I was looking up your work, but I'd like to hear more about that, and maybe the audience would as well.
Sure, absolutely. The People's Arcane School was actually, it wasn't my idea. It was presented to me by my friend Steven. I don't know if he wants me to give his full name or not, but I'll say Steven. And it was his idea. He'd gotten really interested in metaphysics and kind of esoteric philosophy and stuff like that. And that was something that I briefly looked into, but it wasn't a deep interest of mine. But the more that we got into it, the more I became interested. But so his idea for the school was just to kind of have a peer-instructed school where people from the local community are invited to come instruct about whatever kind of knowledge they may have about metaphysics or philosophy from the various different schools that exist out there. And I really liked the idea because I was looking for a way to engage people in self-managed behavior and organizing that wasn't imposed on them. I didn't have to be like, okay, this is my idea, this is how we do it. This was a way for people to kind of present their knowledge that they know and kind of take charge to that degree, not charge over anyone, but charge of the situation. And I think that's important for a self-managed community to have. So that was that was something that I was really looking forward to from the school, and it's something that we got from it. Unfortunately, it's kind of died down a bit because we're a volunteer group and we can't afford to pay anybody, and people's passions kind of ran out as far as what they could teach and stuff like that. But we had a good run, about 2 years, where lots of people were given various different workshops about knowledge as diverse as the harmony of the spheres, to quantum physics, to Hinduism. So, yeah, the Arcane School is a real cool project. It's unfortunate it's been dying down, but I think one of the things that I want to start tackling in the future, sorry if I'm rambling, but one of the things I want to start tackling in the future to get community organizations running better is to get a mutual credit system so that we can start paying each other for this socially necessary labor that kind of falls through the cracks when volunteers can't really take care of it.
Yeah, I really do like that idea. I appreciate the concept because I definitely am part of, outside of the activist sort of anarchist circles that I'm connected to in Houston. I'm also connected to I guess you could say spiritual, metaphysical, meditation circles, and a number of people run in those circles and have a lot of information, a lot of different healing modalities to offer, teachings to offer. So that's a really cool concept. I might have to borrow that and see if we can do that in Houston too.
Absolutely. Another thing, real quick, I think that is important about it is that metaphysics is the kind of thing that often comes along with self-help, and I feel like anarchism is largely the politics of self-help. And so if we can engage self-help also on the more personal, deeper understanding kind of level, that can help along as well.
Oh, absolutely. I wholeheartedly concur with that. With my book series and just the work that we're trying to do at the Conscious Resistance Network is basically trying to present that model, is that no matter what we put out there as far as spreading the message of anarchism and solutions and people power, until we as individuals and we as people are able to do that self-help and work on those deeper levels beyond just the physical fight that we're facing, then we're going to end up, I believe, creating something much worse. And we're just going to see the problems that we've seen our entire lives. So we have to, that's definitely an important aspect, is to have that self-help aspect, the self-reflection and knowledge, in order so that you can have true self-ownership, I believe, and that includes ownership over your mental state as much as anything else.
Absolutely.
I wanted to talk now about, shift gears here for a minute, and one of the things that I've come across your writing, I know that I've seen your writing on your own website, which is evolutionofconsent.com, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so Evolution of Consent, I've read your stuff there, and then also I've seen you contribute to the Center for a Stateless Society. And one of the things that you focus on is Geo-Mutualism. And let's start though with Geoism, Georgism, Henry George. Can you break down a little bit about who he was and what his concepts are, what the main tenets of his beliefs were, and then we'll get into how those have been adapted to your specific beliefs.
Sure, absolutely. So Georgism, or Geoism, is a philosophy that was named after its founder, Henry George, who was a fellow from the 19th century who wrote a book called Progress and Poverty. And his book, Progress and Poverty, was it kind of came out of his awakening from seeing the way that human societies developed around different grades of land and how it affected the well-being of the people in those societies. And he came to the conclusion that the reason we have so much progress, but while still being accompanied by poverty, is because all of the natural produce of the land, all of the surpluses that the land has to offer, was being privatized.
So Georgism and Henry George's efforts were designed to combat the increasing privatization of land. Is that what you were getting at?
Right. Yeah, pretty much. Henry George was just concerned about all the extra value that land produces without human effort, being privately controlled and not being spread around.
Did he believe in, the idea of communally or common-owned land, or, what was his specific view? Because I know he had a mechanism for how he thought this situation could be rectified, but what was his specific view on property?
Right. So Henry George and his movement, the movement following Henry George, were called single taxers, because Henry George's idea was that the land should be taxed, and should be the only real tax would be the full rental value of the land. And so Henry George wanted to use the government as the mechanism to extract the rent, and he wanted to use it for various kinds of public services, and some of it to be given back as dividends. But that's kind of where I split with George, is that I don't believe that the government is capable of providing for those kinds of services, or I don't believe the government is the proper mechanism.
Gotcha. So in a George's system, as put down by Henry George, if I was to come into an area and to want to acquire some land, I would have to pay this land tax that would go towards the community itself, like you said, towards funding different projects or dividends for the community, as a fee for taking that land use away from the community. Is that correct?
That's correct, so long as that land has a rental value. And it only has a rental value if it's under dispute. So you'd be free to homestead any land that wasn't under dispute. That meaning that there wasn't competition for it. People didn't really care if you had that land, because they didn't want it for themselves. So Georgism really only applies where there's rental value. And that rental value is derived from the competition for the land.
Gotcha. Okay, so then you take those ideas of Geoism, Georgism, and you take them a step further, or if it didn't originate with you, the idea is out there, the idea of combining Georgism, Geoism with mutualism. Before we get into Geo-Mutualism, if you can give the audience as simple as possible definition of mutualism.
Sure. Real quick, it wasn't me that put anarchism and Georgism together. It was Fred Foldberry that put Geoism and anarchism together. But I kind of took that and melded it with mutualism into Geo-Mutualism. And so the idea behind Geo-Mutualism is that a kind of Georgist system would operate, but it would operate without the government, being based on more cooperative ownership of land trusts and things like that. Voluntary associations rather than the state. And where Georgism falls short, in my opinion, is that it agrees with capitalism as so far as it believes that capital should be able to derive interest income, and that's where mutualists disagree. So Geo-mutualism would go further and say not only should the rent be shared, but interest should be eliminated through free competition as much as possible, and where not possible, it should be shared similarly through dividends of mutual firms. So mutualism is concerned primarily with economic returns of economic rent and economic interest, and either eliminating those from the economy or doing so as much as possible, or when not possible, distributing it the most fairly.
So we go from Georgism, which is again the land tax that we just discussed a moment ago, but with the idea of that being implemented by some government. Then we step towards geo-anarchism, which would take those ideas and eliminate the government's role, towards what you just described, geo-mutualism itself. Now, how would the view you just described differ from a traditional, say, anarcho-capitalist view on property and land?
Right. Okay, so the fellow I mentioned earlier, Fred Foldberry, he uses a lot of anarcho-capitalist philosophy, and I think he'd loosely even identify as that. He promotes geo-Austrian economics. So I guess where I diverge from Fred and others, they're interested in Austrian economics or even non-Georgist ANCAPs, especially in monetary matters, would be that I don't think that gold is a sufficient means of exchange, or a sufficient basis for a means of exchange for a large industrial economy. And I also think it's an imposition of monopoly to declare gold as the only means of exchange. So mutualist economics is largely interested in opening up competition for money, and especially for the basis of money. For the base, what I mean by that is the basis of money is the thing that money is backed by. So when we had the gold standard, money was backed by gold. But mutualists are interested in having money that can be backed by anything as diverse as the barber's haircuts to the carpenter's chairs in his warehouse, to any other good or service you can name. And opening up money to free competition and allowing those forms of bases to exist.
Okay, gotcha. So, okay, then, and you talk about on your, on your website and in your writing, you talk specifically not only about geo-mutualism, but geo-mutualist panarchism. And I believe most of my audience is probably familiar with the idea of panarchism, but I'll allow you to define that in your words as you explain how geo-mutualism, fits in this panarchist view. Because to me, what you're describing, I definitely believe that, a variety of visions could coexist, and this would be one of them. But go ahead and break down how geo-mutualism fits into a larger panarchist picture.
Sure. So, of course, panarchism is the idea that there shouldn't be territorial monopolies and that someone should be able to choose whatever association they belong to from whatever location they may be in. And so that's something that I accept, but I came to some kind of mechanical issues as far as how would these different communities interrelate and get along with each other. And I kind of feel that it's necessary for them to have some kind of common understanding of both property rights and a common recognition of value, not necessarily within their communities, but between their communities. So with this, I'm looking to promote the idea that any kind of community, whether it be ANCAP or anarcho-communist or, radical Christian or whatever kind of community you want, can exist with whatever kind of particular or specific ideas it wants to, whatever kind of organizations or structures it wants, but that in between them, between the communities and their interrelation, that they recognize a more Georgist basis of property rights and recognize or at least utilize mutual credit between them, especially to solve matters that can't be solved internal to the communities, such as restitution for offenses and things like that. So Geo-Mutualist Panarchism is me promoting what I believe is the best system of property and the best system of money for the interrelating communities of a panarchy.
Gotcha. Okay, so that's your particular view of the best mode to allow this coexistence of all these different communities.
Right, and I feel that way because Georgism and mutualism are both kind of centrist positions. So I don't necessarily believe that I'm going to be able to talk an ANCAP or an ANCOM into these ideas, but I think that the ideas are such that they'd be better tolerated by both sides. And I think that's all that we really need to move forward is something that's more easily tolerated and that we can set into action. Because right now we have anarchists going to corporate grocery store chains and gas stations and stuff like that, and they're shopping alongside, whoever, white supremacists, normal people, Christians, atheists, and they're not thinking about the ideology of those people. They're just thinking about putting food in their mouth or gas in their tanks. So all that we really need to do is come up with a tool. And I think this tool is one that's useful enough and that can be tolerated by all of the different schools of anarchism so that we could put it into use.
I really like that. I appreciate that a lot. Now, one other thing I wanted to mention and to get into here is, the idea of in this panarchist worldview, because as I was talking about before we started the interview, I'm working on a similar essay, kind of how can we create this panarchist world where propertarians and maybe those who view property as theft and those who view property as liberty, how can they coexist and can they coexist? And for that, I keep coming back to, well, the ANCAPs and American libertarians and others identify with the non-aggression principle or the non-aggression axiom, and they feel like that's sort of their guiding moral compass. And if society could adopt something similar, then everybody would be good, And you also have ideas like Josiah Warren's sovereignty of the individual. So I've been searching and kind of seeing like where is something that a variety of ideologies and views are going to accept as the basis for at least coexistence. And I came across an essay that you wrote that discusses a principle that you suggest is complementary to the non-aggression principle that you call the principle of fair regard. I'd like to hear some more about that if you don't mind.
Sure. Yeah, so the non-aggression principle is one that I think is pragmatically useful and that I accept. When it comes down to the nitty-gritty of it, defining what aggression is, I kind of disagree with capitalists because I take a more Georgist position. But I think the non-aggression principle could be applied within a Georgist system as far as relating not to one's freehold, but to one's leasehold, as far as one's Georgist claims to the earth. So the principle of fair regard, though, is complementary to the non-aggression principle, in that the non-aggression principle says that it's okay to defend yourself, but not to aggress on someone else, not to start the offense. And the principle of fair regard says that, yes, that's true, but it looks at the ways that the non-aggression principle might be able to be used for abuses of human life. For instance, I use the example of if someone just watches another person fall into a tank of sharks. It's an unlikely scenario, but say they watch them fall into a tank of sharks, and they have maybe a rope ladder, they have a broom or something that they could possibly extend down to that person without risking their life to help them. The non-aggression principle wouldn't necessarily hold them to having to act that way. It wouldn't say they're bound to help that other person. Whereas the principle of fair regard, as I pitch it, would say where the non-aggression principle doesn't require anyone to help each other in situations of emergencies, that people are required to help each other in situations of emergencies, so far as those efforts can be paid back. So we can't ask anyone to risk their lives for us, but in the condition that they can help us without undergoing any kind of cost that cannot be that can be repaid, then that's what needs to happen.
Okay, so it seems to be try to take a bit more nuanced position of situations and analyzing them individually, and rather than just sort of having this blanket, as with a lot of people, some people do have a very strict interpretation of the non-aggression principle, and are very, I guess you could say they have a thin interpretation of the non-aggression principle.
Sure.
And this seems like this would be a bit more thick or broad for that, because I personally, sort of like what you said, I agree with the non-aggression principle for the most part as far as being a basis that could be useful and can be pragmatic. But when it does come down to the distinction of what people consider aggression, I do tend to differ from the ANCAP crowd, and in that I think that an argument could be made for applying the non-aggression principle to animals as well, and some other areas where I have disagreements. But I'm definitely interested in alternative views or complementary principles, as you put this one. So do you think this is something, or have you felt much reception from this idea of adding the principle of fair regard along with the non-aggression principle from the ANCAP crowd?
I've had some engagements, not too much, not too many public debates or anything like that, but I've had engagements online with people, and I think I've convinced some people. I don't know if they're still convinced, but at the moment I think I did. And I've had some people contact me who are more interested in mutualism and stuff like that like the idea.
Awesome. Yeah, it's always good to see these ideas come together and mix and mold, because I think that's how they're going to continue to evolve, is if people who disagree get to beat them around a little bit and then debate back and forth, and hopefully in a manner that's more more conductive to evolution than we see on Facebook, but actual discussion and debate.
Right.
There's one more topic I wanted to bring up, though, that you spend some time on, and this is one of the things that actually first kind of turned me on to your work, because you said you read my first book with John Vibes, and my audience knows that I try to look into the exploration of the deeper search for meaning in life, whether you call it spirituality or whatever you want to call it, but how that relates to our views on the world itself and the views of ourselves. And I see that you put forth belief in dualistic pantheism, and in combination with your geo-mutualistic panarchism. What do you see dualistic pantheism as being, and how does that play a role in your views as an anarchist?
Okay, I'm sorry. There's a truck driving by. What was the first question?
The first question was just if you could define dualistic pantheism to you, what that means to you, and then how that plays a role in your anarchist views.
Okay, sure. So dualistic pantheism to me is the view that God and nature are one and the same thing. They're not something that are at odds with one another. They're just different ways to understand existence. And the dualist part is that I recognize kind of dualistic philosophies, and I recognize dualism in the mind as being pragmatically useful, such that maybe a Hindu or something may say that we're living in an illusion, but I think that even if that's so, that there are ways to navigate through the illusion, and that we see these dichotomies all around us, and then we have to understand them in some sense, even if we understand that they're ultimately reconciled into one thing. So dualist pantheism to me is that everything, that nature or God is one thing, but expresses us kind of fractally in twos. It's always being divided into to more and more twos, or at least for our experience. And that ends up relating to my politics, because one of the strongest dualities that I see in existence is the duality between the material and the spiritual or mental, or the physical and emotional. And I kind of feel that material processes related to entropy and physics and things like that, are of a different nature than those processes that give things what we call life, and which drive them toward increasing amounts of order and complexity and things like that. And so for me, anarchism is largely just a continuation of a more perennial struggle that exists in the universe. And I want, from my experience of it, it's a higher form of it, but it's just a continual progression, but progression might not even be the word. That's just kind of the human experience of it. Things change.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you on that. I think that our search for understanding and for knowledge and freedom in those emotional, spiritual, non-physical worlds, and this our mind, our inner mind, whether it is a mirage or an illusion or not, that struggle, that search is equally as important as the one that we have in the physical world every day when we question the mechanisms of government and authority that we see in the physical world. I mean, they both are equally valid, and it's interesting, and I'm thankful to see more people with differing views and different views on how that struggle complements each other, how those two different sides work together. So I really appreciate that, and I look forward to reading more from you on that. I did want to mention that you have released 2 books, The Evolution of Consent Collected Essays, Volume 1 and 2. Tell us a little bit about those. When did those books come out, and where can we get them?
Yeah, you can get those on my website, evolutionofconsent.com. I put the first one out a couple years ago, and it was a collection of my past essays that I'd been working on for a while. Some of them being lectures that I gave at the People's Arcane School. Some of them being talks that I presented at the Students for Liberty in Denton, Texas. And so it's a compilation of both my spiritual writings and my political works. And the second one is too, and they kind of have 2 different flavors though. The first one first one starts out with dualist pantheism and then ends up in politics, and the second one is the reverse. It starts with the politics and ends up in dualist pantheism. But those just kind of came out of my. I didn't. At first, I never intended to write a book before the first one came out. I was just putting together essays and stuff because I was having conversations with people online, and I kind of figured that I might as well store them and relink to them for others. And then it kind of developed into a book, and that was I kind of put together as a book so I could use it not as an authoritarian kind of textbook, but as a reference material that I could use with people that I'm talking to and that are interested in my philosophy and stuff. And that's kind of how they came about.
Yeah, I definitely understand that feeling of once you've been spending, you spend so much time doing research and writing and just theorizing and sitting around thinking and contemplating, and then you discuss something with someone, you feel like you've discussed it hundreds of times. You're like, here, just go flip to this page. I've already written about this. You can go see my views. And I feel the same way with my book sometimes. It's like I hate to be that guy that's just like, just go read my book, but I'm like, oh, I've already discussed this. Go refer to this. Is there anything else you'd like to leave the audience with before we let you go?
Oh no, that's it. I just appreciate being on the show, and I appreciate anyone that's taking the time to listen.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Please, everyone who's been listening, go check out evolutionofconsent.com. Check out Will's work. You can find him on Facebook as well. There's tons of essays on the website to check out, and both books can be ordered right there. I really do appreciate your time, Will. Thank you for joining me, and I'm going to continue to keep up with your work, and hopefully we can collab in the real world pretty soon.
All right, awesome. All right, see you there.